Thank you. Ms. Weber.
Thank you. I too thank my colleagues for the work that's been done in the past and for sparing those of us who are recent arrivals from having to deal with what they had to deal with. So I thank them, and of course thank the people of California, more importantly, who are assisting in the recovery. As I look at this, I've come new to the budget process and new to the challenge of working with human services. And so when I look at the documents, I find that there's as pointed out at the beginning, those who suffered the most during the budget cuts, I'm not sure if they're going to benefit the most in this new budget. And that's a great concern for me. Speaking last, I hope that doesn't mean that the people I'm most concerned about are last in our consideration. As we talk about the poverty level of women and what we're doing in an effort to try to reverse that or to stop it. I think most of us have seen the most recent reports by Maria Shriver concerning women in poverty. We know the poverty level in California is among the greatest in the nation in comparison to the lifestyle of what it takes to live here in California. So I'm concerned that I don't see a lot of movement in that area. I see activity in terms of CalWORKs, but by no means comparable to the devastation that has occurred to CalWORKs particularly. And so I'm wondering what position the governor might take. I'm sure as my subcommittee we will be looking at it as looking at the current grant level of families that still puts them in the poverty level. The fact that you have a 2-year window of opportunity to work and then you're cut off, even though we're talking about on one level trying to have some kind of program that's going to help the women and children who are in CalWORKs improve relationships, improve their options. But at the same time, we know that if you're dealing with this poverty of a cycle that's cyclical, that goes up and down, that in 2 years these women may still be in poverty. So that obviously is a great concern, because if they're cut off from CalWORKs in 2 years, that's a concern. Also concerned that we don't seem to have done much with Medi-Cal. We're doing some things, but here we're putting more people in Medi-Cal. I'm not sure whether we're doing enough in terms of our the reimbursements of Medi-Cal payments that's coming, as whether we'll expand the number of providers in the Medi-Cal. We're giving people access to Medi-Cal that they may not have anyone to access it with, and so that's going to be a major concern. And I'm not sure if this budget is adequately addressing the challenge of making sure that those who are Medi-Cal providers can adequately compete and stay alive in their practices while serving our Medi-Cal patients. So I think there are a lot of great things in this budget that we're happy about. I think the devil's always in the detail in terms of getting down to where we need to be. I appreciate the LAO's concern for higher ed and the fact that we are giving resources without great accountability for what happens that should match the goals and objectives of this House, of the Assembly. If we have an issue, we know we're constrained by Prop 98, but we ought to have some goals about diversity with regards to what is being educated at our university system. And as we increase those resources, whether or not that's a part of it, we seem to have a goal of getting folks in and out in a time frame, but we don't seem to focus on who's coming in and who's going out. And I think that's going to be critical as California changes its demographics. So just want to make sure that those issues are brought forth. I'm not sure if the governor has a plan to really respond to those issues of increasing poverty and how we're going to dramatically change it, since those individuals were the ones hardest hit during the budget crisis and the last to recover.
Yeah, no, thank you for your comments and for the focus. I think that absolutely child poverty and the unequal recovery that our economy has had for those people who are the deepest in poverty and the long-term unemployed continues to be an issue of concern for all of us, and something that we continue to look about how we can do things to make that better. I would put your attention towards the 5% increase in the CalWORKs grant levels, recognizing it's still grants are still low, but that is an increase over what they otherwise would have had. Also, we're trying a new pilot for families, in some cases, who are already maybe in sanctioned status, so past their 2 years, but to try and re-engage and bring their children into a high-quality child care center in order and do more parent engagement in order to help those families get to a place of self-sufficiency. Also, I would point to our significant investments in the community college system, which is one place that a lot of people use to improve their mobility economically. And this year, we're providing monies to fund the community college's student equity plans, so that they really need to show how they're improving access and outcomes for those students who are more traditionally underrepresented at our universities. So,
I think it would be good at some point if the governor had a long-term plan of the next 3 to 4 years is what we want to invest in CalWORKs. I think that would be helpful. To look at not just the 5% this year and then something else may happen next year. I mean, with a specific goal in mind. If our goal is to at least bring those families above the poverty level, we need to have that as a goal and a strategy to achieve it, so that we're not just keeping people in a place that keeps them lingering in poverty and obviously all the devastating things that occur as a result of that.
Jacob Hoare with the Department of Finance, and as part of last year's enactment of the budget, one of the things that was done to provide ongoing increases in CalWORKs grant levels going forward and a dedicated revenue source. That was part of the budget that was just enacted this past July. And based on revenue projections and expenditure levels, the CalWORKs program or the CalWORKs grant levels will see increases over the next few years. Now, it may not be every year. It will depend on revenues and expenditures, but it is a step in the right direction. As far as other funding in CalWORKs, specifically to address the shorter time-framed for eligibility for adult participants. The budget does include full-year funding. It was partial year funding in the current year as it gets going, but there is approximately $140 million in funding in the 14-15 proposed budget to provide counties with the ability to engage recipients early in the process. Also funding to expand the number of subsidized employment slots, and then finally family stabilization services, which really to deal with crisis situations. That could include homelessness assistance. It could include more intense service levels that need to be provided, including mental health and or substance abuse issues.
One last thing, in your in-home supportive service programs where you're now prohibiting overtime, just knowing the kind of individuals that are engaged in in-home supportive services, and you're now saying that you're going to have some kind of external program or something that people can utilize to get additional hours. Are we sure that this will, I'm not sure what this is, what kind of reality this is based on, whether you've done some work or research or resolved that this will provide a level of consistent care for individuals that if their providers can't wait for them at the doctor and do those things that might generate overtime because of whatever their need is, that going to these external providers that might then pick up the few hours here and there, are we sure this is going to provide a level of care, quality and consistent care that these individuals need? I mean, oftentimes these are very needy individuals and the providers are not the highest paid individuals, first of all, number one, so overtime is not necessarily breaking the bank always, but the idea of having to switch care or switch individuals coming in simply because you now have a few hours overtime that might interfere with this concept we have about overtime. I mean, has anyone tested this to see if this is really the most sensitive, caring, and effective way to meet the needs of the individuals who are involved in home supportive services?
Well, I can unequivocally say no, it has not been tested, because these rules are new, and we have an in-home supportive services program here in California that is really not like a lot of other states. So it has not been tested. It's something that we continue very serious discussions about, because this is a very difficult proposal we recognize in our budget. There are a lot of complicated factors, both legally and also practically on the ground, and how it's going to work, that we need to work through together. And so I'll just say that we recognize that there's a lot of work here to transition from the system we have today to a different proposal that addresses the federal rules that we're faced with.
Thank you, Ms. Weber, for reminding us that there are a large number of Californians that are not experiencing the benefits of our economic recovery. And also, just as when I hear the term increase, and while I know it is an increase over a previous year's spending, it's hard for me to categorize the Cal Grant adjustments as an increase given what they're set at. So really, to me, it's a path towards restoration versus an increase, since they're, as of last year, they were only at the same level as they were in 1987, and I think in what we're talking about is maybe at the level of 1989. So I made my little reference in my opening comments to my brother, really about how some spending can actually be a means to assist some of our fellow Californians in this economic recovery. Now we heard from Mr. Wagner and then Mr. Gurel.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I want to pick up on something that I think has bipartisan, if not support, at least has had some bipartisan expressions of concern, but I maybe want to come at it from a direction that won't be quite so bipartisan. Court funding is critical. The courts are the branch of government where perhaps most of our constituents at their most vulnerable deal with the state government. And the underfunding, frankly, means that women can't get domestic violence restraining orders as timely as they should and deserve. It means some of our children don't get their dependency or their adoption matters heard. Just simple things like landlord-tenant disputes require people to drive hundreds of miles in some cases. It is critically important, and it's critically important now. And I think we've heard that from both sides of the aisle. So I look at this budget and I wonder where there might be some money to alleviate that concern above the $100 million that doesn't get them back to where they need to be. Let me talk about high-speed rail. The governor is not going to back off on it. I appreciate that. He has a view of it that is perhaps different than some of us, but let's be honest. It is a long-term project, and under the best of circumstances, it's many, many years before any of us get on a high-speed train, if ever we do. So given the current need of our constituents in things like the courts and in many of the other areas, it might be worth taking a step back and saying that's a long-term project that is running into some legal challenges. Let's get them sorted out, and let's spend some of the money that's directed there on some of these current needs. I throw that out as a suggestion. That's, to me, an obvious place to look for some of this additional money. That said, help me figure out where the funding levels for high-speed rail really come from. I see 30% of cap and trade. Walk me through the economic analysis that said that is the right place to get money and 30% is the right number, and what kind of dollars will that be? Just what's the economic analysis behind those figures, please?
Behind the share of the high speed of the cap and trade revenues that are dedicated to high speed rail.
Yes.
Well, it would be amiss if I said that there was a complicated economic analysis behind that number, because there's not. But there is an important budgeting number, because the high-speed rail is not just being funded from cap and trade. It's being funded from a variety of other funding sources, including bonds that were approved by the voters, as well as federal monies that have been granted, in some cases loaned to the state. So the $250 million is a key missing chunk of money that will allow the state, and also we're going to propose a continued investment of cap and trade revenues over the near term, in order to really put together a full financing plan for getting that first segment in the Central Valley constructed. And so cap and trade does fill an important gap, and in terms of an analysis, that was a clear budgetary analysis that we did to arrive at that number. I don't know if I have any.
Thank you.
Mr. Gurrell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is toward the LAO. The governor proposes setting aside, I think, $1.7 billion into what I'll call rainy day fund. I think I use that term loosely because I think a lot of us here have different ideas of what a rainy day fund should look like, but for the purposes of this proposed budget, it's the Prop 58 fund where the governor sets aside $1.7 billion as proposed. The document that your office put out in November seemed to suggest, at least suggest to me, that you would have given your druthers, you would have recommended setting aside more money for the rainy day fund. So that brings me to my question, and that is the $1.7 billion the right amount? And I know you may not be able to answer that, but isn't it possible to, looking at historic data on upturns and downturns in the California economy, as long as the corresponding upticks and downticks in the revenues, and the formulaic nature of the revenues at the time, meaning how much of the revenues were associated with the pit and with capital gains, can't we make a determination as to is it possible to make a determination as to what is a good amount to set aside or try to target to set aside in fiscal years that have a positive revenue income like this 2014-2015 budget? And has your office had an opportunity to take a look at developing a formula whereby we might set an optimum amount during good years to at least put a dent in in moderate downturns in the economy? They don't have to be the 2008s where we saw $28 billion, but certainly $1.7 billion is not going to do much of a dent if the economy turns down in 3 years. And so I just throw that out to you to see if your office has looked at that. Thank you.
Yeah, and at first, I think in fairness to the governor, he's planning on letting the full 3% come off the top. But under our current rules, half of that has to go to pay off the ERBs early. So what the governor did is, in effect, made a decision that I'd rather get the benefit of getting the ERBs paid off a year early. You'll then get the benefit of that for your surplus reserves a couple years down the road. So in fairness there, it's a pretty close call of building up your reserve, paying off that debt a year early, because it does put you in better shape. We in November had suggested it would be nice if you started the 14-15 year with an expected reserve of about 2.5. It'd be great to get that up to about 4 as you step up to $8 billion. Nothing magical about $8 billion. That's what's the Prop 58 maximum reserve target. You could have more if you wanted. So we thought by stepping it up to 4, you're halfway there. The governor would be at about $4 billion if he hadn't paid off those ERBs early. So we don't see a huge difference between even what we had laid out in November and what they decided to do. It's just that's part of the 58 mechanism. As far as your general question of how fast and how, what you should set aside each year, we will think about that. That's a very good question. I think we would tie it to the Speaker's, the Governor's proposal of what's happening in capital gains. The more they're jumping up, the more you should probably think about setting aside in your reserve that year. If the market continues to go up, we get to May and it's S&P's at 1,900, it just means you probably should have more in your reserve. So I think rather than have a fixed formula, I think you need to link it with what's going on and with your revenues. And I would encourage you to get that amount built up as quickly as possible.
And just to clarify, when you say you would agree to tie the amount that one would set aside in a year to the capital gains fluctuation, that is not the only amount that you would consider setting aside. That is just how you might craft a formula. Is that?
Yeah, in fact, again, I think as you could probably take away from my comments, I think it's tough to do to put in the Constitution. But as far as your practices, when you get to May, if the administration's got even higher revenues, it's probably in large part going to be because of capital gains. Not solely. You could have business income, corpus recovery. You could have other things going on. But if in fact they do have more monies and it is tied to capital gains, to me that is even a stronger suggestion as far as your practices that you should think about putting more money in the reserve because of that linkage. So it's hard for me to probably tell you, or even if we thought about this a lot more, here's the specific formula. But clearly, I think the Speaker was right in getting that issue out on the table because what's happening in capital gains is your single most volatile source of your revenue structure.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. My editorial on that one is, and yet by not, if we were to put it all away, and by not making some expenditures, we could be dragging down our economy as we go forward. And certainly that's a challenge for us to figure out, because if we look at, for example, there's been lots of recent articles about minimum wage, and economists opining, and even some prominent Republicans opining about the fact that a low minimum wage is creating a higher cost to government because many folks on that wage are then needing CalFresh, other government subsidies, health care, et cetera. And so and I think in a similar analogy, which was what we have to evaluate as we go through our expending plan, is what expenditures can we do now that help now and into the future that will help reduce that drag, and that might be as prudent, if not more prudent, than purely paying down debt or putting away for a rainy day. So wanted to make that comment. Wanted to also indicate to those in the audience that while we normally have public comment in our hearings, today's hearing was structured to give this overview so that all of us could get sort of on the same page of where the Department of Finance is coming from, LAO's sent some of the questions of the members. Our future hearings will have public comment, that we did not structure it for today. And lastly, just as I heard from the comments of my colleagues, there were some markers placed on things like courts, local control funding formula, developmental disability, containing prison spending, the infrastructure plan, high-speed rail, cap and trade, successor to redevelopment, higher ed spending and Cal grants, addressing those Californians whose the recession still plagues and haven't experienced the economic recovery that the state revenues as a whole are reflecting. So those are some of the markers that I noted in terms of folks' comments, and I look forward to our continued process and to our budget subcommittee's hearings, our interactions, of course, with Department of Finance and LAO, and all of the rest of our colleagues and the public. Thank you so much. We are adjourned.